We're not quite at the finish line, but these local elections are looking very good for Labour.
Make no mistake, this means that we are on course for a Labour majority at the next election. A very, very good set of results for us.
Sir Keir Starmer was speaking as councils across England were subsumed by a red wave. The Tories have lost seats in their hundreds. Not that you'll find Rishi Sunak agreeing with the Labour leader.
Look, I'm not detecting any massive groundswell of movement towards the Labour Party or excitement for their agenda. What people want us to do is focus on their priorities.
And what of the Lib Dems? Well, it seems they too have been winning here, there and everywhere.
Liberal Democrats making big gains across the country. We've beaten the Conservatives in Bath and in Brentwood, in Hertfordshire and in Hinckley.
There's a way to go yet. What have we learned so far? I'm Niall Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily. And all of that means we are, of course, back in the Westminster studio where, fuelled by a combination of sweeties and caffeine, I'm joined by our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, also by Hannah Bunting, Sky's election results analyst. Lovely to see you both. And you're awake, which is very good. Just about. You seem to be grimacing there, Sam, slightly.
I never sleep. I keep going.
The news never sleeps, as someone probably famously said. Hannah, you look a lot better than Sam does. Have you managed to grab any sleep?
I got about an hour and a half, but as long as I just stand up, keep going, don't sit down, I'm doing okay.
See, I remember the days when we just crack on through without having sleep. These two, I mean, honestly, it's ridiculous. Anyway, let's carry on. I want to start because we're recording this just around 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon. And handily enough, guys, a couple of minutes just before we came into the studio, I received an email from Greg Hands, the Conservative Party chairman. And I think it's probably a good place to start. It reads this. Neil, I always find it really strange when politicians address me just by my first name. Neil, I know the results are disappointing. I know people are worried about what Labour councils will mean for their local communities. But I want to be totally honest with you, Neil. These local elections are a massive wake-up call. Sam, he's not wrong.
No. Given it's 3 o'clock, we're actually about halfway through this process. We've had 105 councils, but there are 125 of the 230 still left to go. And many of the councils that are all out with lots of seats are still to declare, which means that at the moment, one of those figures that we're looking for has the Conservatives' net loss on minus 300, but there's lots of capacity for that to grow. We'll see whether it gets to or even possibly beyond 1,000. But I think, Neil, the story of today is at this point now clear. So short of some huge surprise, I think we know the headlines. And so let's explain why Greg Hands is right to be saying what he's saying. Just to break it down, the biggest thing I think that you can say after looking at the first however many hours of, the first 13 hours of results is that on the basis of what we've seen, it is so hard to imagine a Conservative walking into Downing Street after the next general election. If the result is anything like this, the change in share of the vote, some of the places in which Labour are making advances mean that it is incredibly difficult for the Conservatives to form the next government. So that's headline number one. Headline number two is a but. Labour are doing well. They are doing well all around the country, lots of different parts of the country, whether it's Medway in Kent, whether it's Plymouth and Portsmouth, whether it's up further north with Stoke-on-Trent, the Red Wall, Jonathan Gullis's got to see he's a 2019 who won for the first time off the back of. But all of those have ended up going to Labour. Some of them, like Medway and Kent, have gone all the way from the Conservatives to Labour. But it doesn't look quite enough to be able to achieve that extraordinary feat that Keir Starmer needs to achieve if he's going to get an overall majority.
Hannah, just explain a little bit about the maths behind that, because, of course, part of the reason that Labour have an almighty mountain to climb come the next general election, we'll dig down into the individual results in just a second, but for the big picture stuff, part of the reason that they have this massive mountain to climb is because they did pretty badly back in 2019. So on the basis of what we have seen so far, are we within the predictions that you and Michael Thrasher, another, of course, of Sky News election results analysts, are they within the predictions that you guys have been making?
Absolutely, yes. So Labour need 124 parliamentary seats to hit that magic 326 number, which means that they are, at the slimmest possible majority. Now, that kind of a gain has only ever happened 3 times before for them. So once in 1929, a long time ago, once in 1945, and then 1997 Labour landslide. It's a huge gap that they have got to leap over, basically. So what we're seeing at the moment from this vote, where we've done a national estimated vote share, and we're having the Conservatives on roughly 28 to 30%, and Labour roughly on 36 to 38%. So there's about a 6-point difference between them. What Labour need to get that 124 seats is double that. They need a 12-point swing, whereas they're only showing sort of a 6-point difference between the two at the moment. So it looks like they would be the largest party in government, but nowhere close to having a majority.
And that has prompted one of the most interesting, most unusual, most creative arguments of the night, which is the Labour Party saying, and this is a bit reasonable, but a bit unreasonable, that if you take into account something that hasn't happened and we don't know for sure will happen, then we'll get an overall majority. In other words, the line from Labour HQ is, yes, these results are good enough to give us an overall majority because we think there's going to be a collapse of the SNP in Scotland and Labour is going to be the main beneficiary. And there's no doubt, by the way, that the polls are going in Labour's favour in Scotland.
Yeah, collapse is a bit premature, however.
But A, we don't know what's going to happen with the SNP. It's a long way to go. 2, we don't know that Labour's going to be the main beneficiary. And 3, we don't know on what scale, because quite a lot of those SNP seats have quite big majorities. So there's a great big bit of whataboutery about the Labour response that means that they are claiming victory, but others are saying, well, we only know what we know from the numbers, and they aren't. That isn't quite as good as you might have thought.
OK, so Hannah, looking just a little bit more deeply into what has been going on, and as we've said, still an awful long way to go. I mean, 2 things strike me. 1, do we have any idea as to where the Labour gains have been made in the main? Has it just been a straight Conservative to Labour swap? Because the Lib Dems have been crowing an awful lot at the moment. But also, that line from Greg Hands a couple of weeks back where he suggested, we're on track to lose 1,000 seats. I understood that to be expectation management at the time, but it's looking a possibility at 3:10 on Friday afternoon.
Absolutely, yeah. Michael Thrasher said that if the Conservatives lost 200 seats by breakfast, then they were on track for that 1,000 loss, and that's exactly what we saw happen. Across the country, it looks like there is definitely some direct Labour gain from the Conservatives, and the same for Liberal Democrat gain from the Conservatives. But that independent and other vote share is really interesting to watch as well, because that was very high in 2019, which is the results that we're comparing this to. And also, some of these councils were really precarious. The Conservatives could have lost half of their councils by losing only 5 or fewer seats. So the churn has been huge, and that precarity is turning into a lot of these changing hands.
And just on the Lib Dems, I mean, again, kind of back of a fact packet calculation and the scantest of analysis by me, but you look at where they've been picking up. I mean, if I were a Conservative MP with a bit of a marginal constituency sitting in the blue wall right now, I would be bricking it.
Absolutely, and that is another thing that means that Labour can't really become the largest party, and have a majority, because every one of those seats that the Liberal Democrats take is a seat that the Labour Party cannot take from the Conservatives. So mathematically, it turns into, yes, the Conservatives are falling, the Liberal Democrats and Labour are gaining, but that means that Labour can't hit that magic 326 number if we saw the same thing happen at the parliamentary level.
Sam, remind me, the last time we talked about local elections, you told me there were 3 things that we needed to keep an eye out for. Remind our listeners.
Oh, hurrah, you remembered.
Well, I didn't remember the 3 things. That's why I'm asking you to remind me.
You listened, you noticed something I said, which is better than normal. Right, there are 3 ways in which you can judge a local election. The first is the number of seats that change hands. Currently, The Conservatives are down 292, Labour are up 163. The second way that you can judge the way that local elections are going are by the way that the number of councils change hands. So currently, overall, the Conservatives have lost 21 councils. That's because, as Hannah said, actually it's really easy if they just lose a tiny number for a lot of Conservative councils to no longer be in charge and it to go to no overall control. The Labour Party have picked up 6 councils. The third way that you measure local election performance is by the share of the vote, and that is the thing that is still being calculated. But for the first time ever on a Friday, we haven't had this before. It's a really big, great innovation. Huge kudos to Michael Thrasher, Hannah and all of the team. We do have rough percentages. They're the ones that Hannah was just outlining. 28 to 30% for the Tories, 36 to 38% for Labour, 18 to 20% for the Lib Dems. That's very high. 16 to 19% for other. And I think you have to put all of it together. And I think one of the things that's interesting is that, yes, Labour have been doing well in some of the areas that they need to do, and there's a huge geographical spread of areas where they've advanced, but there's also areas where they're plateauing a bit. And I think in the wash-up of this set of local elections that Labour will be having next week, they'll be wondering, I think in particular in bits of the Midlands, why they didn't end up doing better than they have done. The sort of Walsalls and places like that, I think, have underperformed when it came to expectations. So they've big victories that were signalled in advance. Places like Swindon, places like Plymouth, and Stoke. Funnily enough, we had cameras at most of those because some people know what they're doing. But I think in some of the areas where they're less keen to talk about and I just want, because I'm obsessed by the spin that goes on around local elections. The Labour Party have this argument. It's brilliant. It goes, the only thing that matters is the areas that matter in a general election. And let me tell you, Neil, we're doing really well in those, right? When you hear that, what you need to realise is that is them going, so what we're going to do is we're only going to tell you about some results but not others. And we're certainly not going to tell you about all results. And so every time they say what matters is that we're doing well in the areas where we need to in a general election, they are cherry picking the bits of the argument that make it work, reject, delete all those bits because they're meaningless.
To be fair, I was just about to ask you, on the basis of your 3 tests, seats, councils and vote share and swing, which party has been responsible for the most egregious spin today? I mean, I was going to throw Greg Hand's hat into the ring for saying, I know people are worried about what Labour councils will mean for the local communities. Yeah, especially those local communities that just voted them in by the hundreds of thousands. I mean,
terrified as they mark the X on the ballot paper, Neil.
Exactly. But are you perhaps suggesting that actually, for all of the chat, Labour might be the worst at spin today? I mean, they've had a good day. They are entitled to a little bit of spin.
Yes, and I think that's true, and I think that's logical, because in a sense the Conservatives went into this set of local elections knowing that they had the least to lose in spin terms, because they had the most to lose in terms of seats and vote share and councils. So there wasn't much point in sugarcoating it and then being embarrassed. And although it's just gone 3:00 and we aren't at halfway in terms of counting of councils, it is entirely possible that we do end up somewhere near that magical, terrible 1,000 figure that has seen Michael Thrasher's reputation reduced as the Tories used it as a central prediction, when in fact all Michael was saying is that's the very, 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 very worst case scenario. Well, that very, 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 very worst case scenario looks like it might end up becoming something approximating what really happened. That doesn't mean it's okay. It still means it's very, 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 very terrible. So in a sense, they're less guilty of the crime of spin, whereas Labour have been saying, in our analysis, they were saying last Friday to me, this is how we'll spin you on Friday morning. And lo and behold, they've done it. And they're doing it.
They're honest in their spin.
And it's working with some people, but it's not working in this studio.
Hannah, talk to me about the Liberal Democrats. I mean, if you were watching, as I was indeed, Sir Ed Davey with the sound down this morning, you might have been a little bit gobsmacked by yet another Lib Dem campaign stunt. That time's up for Rishi Sunak. Cringe. But if you're watching with the sound off, I mean, you'd have thought he'd have won the lottery. I mean, is he right to be as happy? And is this the beginning of the return of the Liberal Democrats as a force in national politics?
Yeah, I think at the Tiverton and Honiton by-election, it was a wall that they smashed through or something. They always seem to have these sort of big, spectacular displays when they're doing well. I mean, that national estimated vote share projection of 18 to 20%, if they hit the top of that, the Liberal Democrats haven't had a 20% share.
Since
least
Charlie Kennedy days, presumably.
As far back as I've been looking, which is about 20 years, they haven't had that. They reached 19, I think it was, in 2018, sometime around then. So it is a very, very good night for them if they are able to do that.
Can I ask a question? Don't take this the wrong way. I was surprised how high the Liberal Democrat figure was. Is the Liberal Democrat vote what we say in the jargon being used efficiently? Is it in the places that they need it to be? And is it delivering them seats? And would it deliver them seats at a general election? Or are there lots of kind of wells of Liberal Democrat votes from what we can see that are building up in places that are of no good to them? So it's still unclear whether or not they're back in as a force in elections in the way they were under Nick Clegg and Charlie Kennedy.
Well, because of our voting system, it's easier to get that concentration of votes in a ward than it is in a parliamentary constituency. So although they do have this sort of concentrated support that we're seeing translated into seats, and it is where they are challengers to the Conservatives and where they could really do some damage to the Conservatives, how that would aggregate up to parliamentary constituency is something that remains to be seen. And also we're going to have boundary changes that come into force on the 1st of July.
Let's talk then about what we can take from the set of the results. Again, we keep saying this. We're recording this around 3 o'clock, but there is a fair way to go, but we have a very good idea of the direction of travel. Given that there are no seats being contested outside of England, given that even within England you're missing out London and several of the other big metropolitan areas, 8,000 council seats, I think thereabouts. How much can we truly learn about what is going to happen at the next general election from this set of data?
You asked me that question last time we were in the studio, Neil, and I'm going to give you the same answer. Or you could just splice in the answer from last time if you want, because clearly this is one of those questions you weren't listening to the answer for.
Yep.
But you have to treat it gently. But if you look at the graphs of seats or share, the local elections results give you an indication. They give you a flavour of the direction of British politics. Inevitably, on days like today, people like us get out the slide rule and calculate it to the nth degree. But it is the case that, a few years before there's been a change of prime minister, party and prime minister, the party with the largest number of seats changes. So that happened, I think it was 1991 ahead of 1997, 2002 or 3 ahead of 2010. There's a relationship there, but it's not the closest and most intimate relationship. But neither is it of no material fact. And the reason for that is, yes, there are local issues that don't prefigure nationally, but also a lot of people don't pay any attention to those local issues and only vote on the what little. I mean, it's amazing to me that they don't spend all their day listening to you and me, but incredibly some of them don't, and that they just rely on whatever little they know about the political party. So it's a bit national, it's a bit local. That's all quite understandable. And in some places it's more local, and in some places they haven't heard of any of the councils or anything that's happening. So it's a bit more kind of default to what they've heard about national.
And we've been talking for, best part of a year now, at least, about how far Labour ahead are in the polls, with some seat projections of getting them, over 400 seats at a parliamentary election. But that's based on opinion polling, right, which is super valuable, and it gives a really good temperature of what the public are thinking about, and especially the governing party and an opposition party. But that is different to an actual election campaign, and when people have to walk into a voting booth and put an X next to somebody's name and a party's name. So what we can take from this is okay, well, are Labour performing as well at the ballot box as they are in the opinion polls? And it looks like from, around 70% of people in England were eligible to vote in these elections. And it looks like they are on course to be that largest party, but not to gain that majority.
Sam, just a word on the kind of the pure politics of all of this. I've been listening quite closely to the spin being put out there by the Conservatives today. And Rishi Sunak has, as you would expect, as all party leaders do at times like this, has been front and centre and said, I've been listening, we understand that people are voting this way for whatever reason. But can he escape blame for this disastrous set of results? The line would be, he has been in job for, a handful of months. Look at the people that came before him. Liz Truss, Boris Johnson. That's an awful weight to have around your neck when you head into an election. I mean, can he spin it in that fashion that this is not all down to him? Because, the whole point of Sunak was to steady the ship, was to stop the rot, and he hasn't.
I think the answer to that is let's see where the conversation goes from here on in. Mm-hmm. Now, I saw Rishi Sunak earlier today and for one of those pool interviews. And
that's where you basically do an interview for all the broadcasters.
That's right. And however hard I tried, the Rishi bot gave the same answer to every question.
You're not going to be welcome in number 10 if you keep going like this.
Nobody likes me. I don't care. And essentially, his answer was, with his best sad face, I'm very disappointed for any Conservative that loses their seat. But the bottom line is, we're going to work really hard. The people's priorities are my 5 priorities. Did you know that I want to stop the small boats? And he said that 3 times, and then we moved on to the coronation. And that's his line, right? I'm steadying the ship, and I've got a plan to do it, and my plan is the best plan. But there was a really interesting voice. That voice actually was speaking to John Craig overnight. It's the outgoing leader, the ex-Conservative leader of Medway Council, who put the blame firmly at the National Party and, frankly, pretty close to Rishi Sunak's door. He was saying, look, I think that there's no answer for us with the cost of living crisis when it comes up on the doorstep. I think we've got problems with the planning system. Now, I think by that they think the planning system allows for building too many houses. Actually, one of Rishi Sunak's first decisions was to relax the plans that they were going to have, caving into his backbenchers. So the cave-in is not enough, I think, it was implicitly the message from the Medway outgoing Tory leader, and that there's still too much noise from the parliamentary party. Now, Rishi Sunak would hope that over time that noise diminishes and some of those. But I don't see that there's an answer to cost of living and planning anytime soon. So, there is going to be some blame attached. There's no way that it isn't. And even though he's in a much politically stronger position, I think it opens up a new conversation. I don't think that conversation substantially is the one that John Redwood wants to have, which is please can you slash taxes and roll back the state, which is what he's kind of already taken to Twitter to say, it being a weekday. And but I do think that if the defeated candidates, the MPs representing areas that went substantially backwards, think that there is big political problem there, then I think Downing Street may be forced to sort of rethink a bit.
And just a final word from you, Hannah. Sam knows this already. I am not a man who is riven by vice, but occasionally I have done a bit of political betting. I just wonder, is it game over for Rishi Sunak? Is there any chance that at the next general election the Conservatives will be the majority party?
Well, I mean, I don't like to say that anything is impossible, right? Because we've been surprised so many times over the last 5, 10 years, however many it's been that all of this has been going on. But it's a mountain to climb, right? He has had enough time to steady the ship or to prove integrity and competence and all of the things that he said that he was coming to do. But that hasn't translated into a good local election result.
If I could put Hannah's thoughts in my language, it could turn out that Keir Starmer's a Martian. Could turn out that Rishi Sunak has superpowers. It might turn out that Ed Davey is the next Messiah. What? Neil, we just don't know.
Thank goodness. Hannah, Sam, I will let you crack on. Much more work for you today, but for now, thanks. My thanks to Hannah, to Sam, and of course to you for listening to the Sky News Daily with me, Neil Patterson. This edition was produced by Emma Ray Woodhouse. Our editor is Philly Beaumont.